The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. When the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servers who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves good wine first, and then, when people have drunk freely, an inferior one. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord. Good morning. A brisk day today, right? Yeah, it's kind of like wintertime, happily, for me anyway. So, did you pick up in the first reading today this truth that God compares himself to a groom that delights in his bride when he's talking about humanity? That God compares himself to a husband who takes delight in his bride? And this reality that God really does, in a strange sort of way, want to marry us. God wants to be united to us. And why does he want to marry us? Because we've been divorced. Okay, we've been divorced. Why? How did we get divorced? Sin divorced us from God. And now God is in the process of drawing us back into his family. And he's going to do that in a series of ways. He's going to try to communicate his desire to take us back, to embrace us, to cleanse us. And one of those ways is we think about baptism, right? Baptism is a rebirth, and rebirth into the family of God. Well, another expression of going from 2 families to 1 family is marriage. And so God wants to marry us. So that's the Old Testament that kind of starts to set us up for what's happening in the gospel. And what is this gospel about? In the Gospel of John, we hear on the lips of Jesus, or we hear from John that I have come to give them life, and life to the full. Or another translation is, I have come to give them life, the abundant life. That God desires us to recognize this abundance in the world. Now, do you think, and think about this for a second, imagine yourself just kind of looking at the world. Is there enough happiness to go around for everybody? Is there enough for everybody? Or if those people are too happy, they're taking away from your happiness some? Is there enough happiness? Is there enough love in the world? That if your parents love your siblings, is there still enough love for you? Is there enough love in the world? Is there enough opportunity in the world? Is there enough forgiveness? Is there enough recognition? Is there enough money? Is there enough room? Or do we live in a world of scarcity? Which is it? Abundance or scarcity? Jesus comes to give us the abundance. And the story in the gospel today is about abundance. It's about love, it's about abundance, it's about obedience, it's about a number of different things. There is enough, this beautiful gospel. So Jesus is at a wedding. Jesus is at a wedding. His mother is at the wedding, and we know what happens at the wedding. He turns the water into wine. One of his most famous miracles, right? One of his most famous miracles. And this story is about Jesus not making enough wine just for a final toast, right? He doesn't make just barely enough wine. He makes, frankly, more than enough wine. He makes this overabundance of wine. Probably around 150 gallons of wine. And the wedding's already been going on for some time. So what are we to make of this overabundance of wine, this superabundance of wine? And I'm going to kind of pause the homily for a little public service announcement, okay? Just very briefly. I know personally, and many of you know as well, that alcohol can cause the worst kinds of sufferings in people's lives. That alcohol has been an occasion of great sorrow and distress and health problems and emotional problems and breakup and all of the other things that alcohol can bring into family life, right? And that's a reality. And this gospel today has nothing to do with permission to overindulge in alcohol. Drunkenness is a sin. It's a sin at weddings. It's a sin at the Cana of Galilee. It's a sin across the board. It is. But that's not what this gospel is about. This gospel is about another kind of abundance. It's about an abundance of spirit, but it's the Spirit of God that it's about the abundance of. And the wine is a symbol. So Jesus is going to turn the water into wine. With that disclaimer, if you will, we're going to kind of dive in a little further into the gospel. It's a gospel about abundance. It's a gospel about intercession. It's a gospel about obedience. It's a gospel about the New Testament. It's a gospel about law and grace. So, Jesus is there at this wedding with his mother, and she notices that the couple is running out of wine. Now, that would be a major social faux pas, okay? This is not the way wedding ceremonies were supposed to go. It would have been an embarrassing situation for that family. And so Mary, thinking about earthly things, Mary, thinking about worldly embarrassment, approaches Jesus and says, "Son, they're running out of wine." Now, if you pay attention, and some people don't like this, I don't think, Jesus gives Mary a little gentle rebuke. He gives her a little gentle rebuke. He says, what? What does this have to do with me? Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. She requests this earthly wine. Jesus knows he's the God of the universe. He understands everything. He's got it all under control, right? But she has come to him with this request. But it's interesting. He says, my hour has not yet come. And then he turns around and does what? He turns around and does what she asks. You know why he does what she asks? Because he's a good son and he honors his mother. And so he honors his mother, and he takes this situation of natural wine and he supernaturalizes it. He injects this reality of grace into it. The God of time and space takes this moment. It's not yet my hour, but he's going to begin to prepare for his hour. So he supernaturalizes this, and he points forward to another wedding. You know, there's only two places in the entire Gospel of John, and that's where this story comes from. There's only two places in the entire Gospel of John where the Blessed Mother appears. Now, she appears in a lot of other places in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but only in two places in the Gospel of John she appears. One of them is at the wedding feast of Cana, and the other one is at the foot of the cross. She's at the wedding feast of Cana and the foot of the cross, and I promise you that is not an accident. And we're going to get to that a little bit more in just a second. Now, so she asks, she tells him there's no wine. He says, what does this have to do with you and me? What is going on here? What's the next words that come out of Mary's mouth? Do whatever he tells you. Has there ever been better advice given? Has there ever been better advice given than that? Do whatever he tells you. You know, I was trying to think about what better advice there could be. One of my best or my favorite pieces of advice was given by Padre Pio. And it goes like this: pray, hope, and don't worry. Okay, that's a pretty good piece of advice too, okay? And pray more and worry less. That's a pretty good piece of advice too, right? But what's the best advice ever given? What is it? Do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. So Mary knew. Mary knew in her heart, he's going to do what I asked him to do. And so what do? Jesus says, and the story goes on, the narrator says, now there were 6 stone water jars there. And he comments on what those stone water jars were for. What were they for? Jewish ceremonial washing. Now, where did the Jewish ceremonial washing come from? The law. The law. The law. The Jews had all of these laws that they had to follow, and they followed these laws, some of them to such extreme that they got it all wrong, and they put the law before the love of God or the love of neighbor. But there were 6 stone jars for ceremonial washing, and these 6 jars represent the law. And so what is Jesus going to do with the law? The ordinary, the plain, the mundane, the burdensome. He's going to turn it into wine, something celebratory, something good, something, if you will, supernatural, because it was water, now it's wine. Something extraordinary. And he doesn't make just a little bit of it, he makes a lot of it. And this again points to this superabundance. Jesus again in the gospel says, I have come that they may have life and life to the full. The water and the wine at the wedding are symbols. The water become wine is a symbol. The law becomes grace. The law comes through Moses. Grace and truth come through Jesus Christ. Now this wine, which again, I'm here to tell you, was more than they could use. It's destined for another wedding. And what's the other wedding that this wine is destined for? Now before you answer that question, there's another occasion in the gospel where Jesus makes way too much of something. There's another occasion in the gospel when Jesus makes way too much of something. Think of when that other occasion when Jesus makes way too much, and they have 12 baskets left over, right? So he makes way too much wine, and he makes way too much bread, and there's going to be another wedding that we use this bread and wine at. Now Jesus goes forward into his ministry, and he comes at last to the Last Supper. And what 2 elements is he going to use there at the Last Supper? What has he made enough of to give to all the apostles to use as well? And again, we have to put our thinking cap on. We have to be able to draw these lines and connect these dots. So there's Jesus at the Last Supper, and he takes the bread, and he blesses the bread, and he breaks the bread, and he gives it to his apostles. And then he takes the wine, and he blesses the wine, and he pronounces over the wine, this is the cup of my blood. So Jesus, who has the power to go from water to wine, goes from wine to what? His blood. And I'm not saying that the wine that we have at church here this morning is from the wedding feast of Cana, but it is from the wedding feast of Cana, okay? Symbolically. I'm not saying that the bread that we're going to use a minute from now or a few minutes from now is from when he fed the 5,000 and had the 12 baskets left over, one for each apostle. I'm not saying it's the same bread, 2,000-year-old stale bread. I'm not saying that, but I am saying it is the same bread. Right? Are you following me? And what is the wedding? The wedding is, take this, all of you, and eat of it. This is my body, given up for you. You know what a husband and wife are supposed to do for one another? They're supposed to say, this is my body given to you. That's like the essence of a marriage. And so, my brothers and sisters, did I tell you, have you ever heard this idea that God wants to marry you? Have you ever heard that God wants to adopt you? Have you ever heard that God wants to gather you back into his family? And how does he do that? He does that by baptizing us. He does that by adopting us. He does that by marrying us. And when is our wedding? Our wedding is at the Last Supper, and our wedding is on Calvary, when Jesus, the good husband, lays down his life for his wife, the bride. And how do we remember that? And not do we just remember it, we make it present. And we make it present through the wedding supper, the wedding feast of the Lamb, which is the Holy Mass. And so, my brothers and sisters, we hear this story about the wine, the water becoming wine. We hear a story about the bread being multiplied. Too much. Well, it's not too much because we've been using it for the last 2,000 years. And so today, as we approach the altar, we approach the wedding feast of the Lamb. And Jesus, who comes to us, comes to draw us back into the family of God. And it is a great privilege to be here at this wedding and using the wine, if you will, from Cana.